I'm never falling asleep on the train again. My commute to and from work is fucking dreary. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. 4 hours daily, I'm stuck on a train. The seats are uncomfortable, and the temperature is either too hot or too cold. They can't seem to get the fucking thing sorted. But worst of all is the people. I have a thing about personal space, and public transportation doesn't play well with that particular type of anxiety. You've probably seen that joke about personal space in Finland. Well, Norway is no different. If you can keep at least an arm's length distance, you do it. If there's an empty double seat, you take it. You don't fucking sit next to someone you've never met if you can avoid it. Talking to strangers on the train is a definite breach of the social contract. These are the rules, and they're not that fucking hard to follow. Mostly it went fine, you know. I'd hate it, but I would manage. I'd just put my headset on and fall asleep most days, waking up a few stations from my stop, and that would be it. But there's no fucking way I'm doing that anymore. I was heading home after pulling the afternoon shift. As always, the train was jam-packed, but it would gradually empty as we got closer to my station. Usually, there would only be a handful of people left at that point. I managed to find a window seat in the middle cart and slouched down tiredly. An elderly man sat down next to me, so I just turned to the window and cranked up the volume on my headset to max. After the conductor took his rounds checking the tickets, I must have fallen asleep. I remember having the strangest dream, but I've never been able to describe it. It was like an emotion, or a sensation or something, like a feeling of being cold, broken, and scared, full of anguish and despair. And it went on forever. It was like I was trapped in that dream, like I didn't want to wake up, regardless of how bad it felt. I've never quite understood it, but it was like something was trying to prevent me from regaining consciousness. I had to struggle to wake up, like you would from sleep paralysis. Just force yourself to snap out of it. I came to with an aggressive jolt, completely covered in sweat. The train was too hot this particular day, it would seem. A tall man sat next to me, his face concealed by the hood of his jacket. He was fiddling with what appeared to be a leather-bound notebook. I gazed out of the window idly. There were still a few stops before my station. I sighed. My back was killing me, and I desperately needed to get out of here. I looked around the cart, and it was then I noticed it. It was fucking empty. This guy had fucking loads of empty seats to choose from, yet he decided to sit on the one next to me. He was breaching the fucking social contract. I did my best to control my anger, but I think I let out several disgruntled sighs and shifted my position furiously to get my point across. He didn't seem to notice. He just sat there, stroking the fine leather of his notebook. It was just such a strange thing to do. I was utterly perplexed. I heard the crackling static from the speaker system a few minutes later. They were announcing the next stop, the last one before mine. I sighed again. Still 10 minutes to go. I secretly hoped the guy would just up and leave. He suddenly turned to me just before the train reached the station and opened his notebook. "Pick one," he said, his voice dark and broody. "I'm sorry, what?" I responded weakly. He pointed to the open notebook. 3 strange cards were on display on the first page. They looked like old tarot cards, but the images were black and white, and quite frankly, they freaked me the fuck out. "Choose wisely," he said. I still couldn't make out his face from under the hood. I shifted uneasily in my seat. "Sorry, I don't understand." I swallowed deeply. "Choose," he just repeated, pointing aggressively to the cards. I looked at the cards again. The first one looked like an image from an old book, maybe 17th century, and depicted a grisly scene where a man hung from a tree while a demon was removing a smaller person, possibly a child, from his abdomen. The image of the second one looked a bit newer, showing a white-clad woman carried by a human skeleton floating over a graveyard, The last one looked like an old black and white photography of a human skull in profile. "Last chance," he whispered hoarsely. The unspoken indication of the words sent shivers down my spine. With a trembling finger, I just pointed to the last card. He nodded and took the card from the notebook. "Fine choice," he said as he handed me the card. The train pulled into the station, and the man closed the notebook and stood up. Without so much as a word, he just walked out of the train. I let out a massive sigh of relief and just sunk down in my seat. That was some fucked up shit, I thought. Some crazy fucked up shit. I was extremely cautious the rest of that week. I always sat in the front and never allowed myself to sleep. I never saw the man again, but I couldn't let it go. It was just so absurd. That sort of thing just stays with you, you know? That feeling of utter discomfort and uncontrollable fear. A few weeks later, I got to work a bit late because of some delay with the trains. I was expecting some lip from my boss, but he seemed preoccupied with something, nose deep in his computer monitor. "Sara," he said, "come look at this." I walked over to his monitor, and he pointed to the news article he was reading. Some woman had gone missing overnight, and the police were asking for any witnesses in the area to report them. They couldn't rule out foul play, but they also had to consider other possibilities. There was a picture in the article showing the last location she was seen, just outside her apartment. I let out a horrified scream and stumbled back. "Sara," my boss yelled. What is it? What's wrong?" In the window of the apartment, you could clearly see it, placed neatly behind the curtain. A black and white tarot card showing a white-clad woman carried by a human skeleton floating over a graveyard. This is Kinetic Symphony. If you've enjoyed this narrated story, please subscribe and like the video to help me grow. Thank you.